Okay, welcome everyone to the Environmental Justice Practitioners Network webinar. We are so excited to come back together for a part 2 discussion with Pamela Sparr, our special guest speaker this evening. And Pamela has done so much with Unitarian Universalism and these movements that she'll be talking about. Pamela, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more. You could do it better than me, I think, and then start us off with an opening.
Thank you, Allie, and hi, everyone. It's really great to see folks returning from last month and a lot of new participants too. And I must say I'm particularly delighted that we have a representative of the next generation with us. So that's absolutely lovely. And a four-legged as well. So I think we have, all categories covered. I, like Meredith, am a member of All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. And in terms of my experience working on climate justice, I have done that professionally, both for our denomination as well as for another. And I've also have a lot of experience in my home church in terms of marrying work on racial justice with environmental justice as our congregation worked on becoming a green sanctuary. I was the founding chair of our 7th Principal Committee and helped shepherd that along. And as some of you may know who've read Justice on Earth, I wrote a chapter in that, and as a result of that was very kindly asked by Karen and Allie to participate in this webinar series. So I'm really delighted to have the chance to be with all of you and to think about some of these really exciting ideas and callings together. I thought tonight, in terms of an opening chalice lighting, I would do something a little different. Prophetic imagination, which is our theme both last month and this month, is kind of in a way all about shining a light, about offering a compelling, positive vision of who and what we want to be together. And so as I was reflecting on that, I was thinking, well, what kind of light illuminates my life? What kind of life illuminates all of our lives? And so I thought I would reflect on that by looking at 2 different lights in my life and sharing that with you. The first one is actually this really old lamp. And this lamp was attached to a helmet that my father would wear going down into the mines in southern Ohio. So a shout out to our Ohio person tonight. And he would go down into the mines also in West Virginia to inspect the coal. His job was to buy coal for one of the large shipping companies that plied the Great Lakes. And their freighters moved iron ore and wheat and steel and other commodities throughout the Midwest and fueled the economy of the Midwest and indeed the US. And this lamp is powered by oil, just a little bit, and it was used to inspect coal, so 2 fossil fuels. And it represents a very precious job for my dad, who grew up on a farm and had a high school education. It symbolizes for me, both in a personal and very powerful way, a nation that was in love with fossil fuels and something that once was but can no longer be. And the second lamp, it might be particularly of interest to our participant who's interested in the Middle East, is this Ramadan lamp. And it was given to me as I was working in Cairo, Egypt with trade unionists. And I worked on with them for a variety of years. And as you may know, Egypt is a member of OPEC. And this is a very simple lamp. It's actually made because someone cut up an olive oil tin container and clipped it together and welded some pieces together to become a lamp. And I don't know if you can see, but it has lots of hearts all over it and some writings from the Quran. And I think of it as the hearts kind of symbolizing God's love and the love emanating out into the world through us. And one of the things I thought was neat about this is that actually this lamp can be powered by lots of different forms of energy. You can pop a candle underneath it. You could put a battery-powered flashlight underneath it, and these would glow. Or you could actually put an LED light bulb in it. And so, in a way, it kind of illustrates a flexibility, a versatility in its fuel needs. And this lamp is able to adapt to local conditions. And I also like it because I feel that it reminds me that beauty and utility and meaning can be found in simple things. And it kind of symbolizes for me where we're headed, a sustainable economy that features careful use of local materials, and in this case, actually recycled materials. And it is inspired and guided by what we consider our highest values to be, by universal forms of wisdom, and by what we consider to be sacred and is culturally relevant. So my prayer for our time this evening is that together, our time together will be illuminating in different ways for all of us. So amen and ashe. So thank you for lighting your chalice, Allie. Would you like to say anything about yours and your light?
This was a gift. It's a big leaf Western maple. I had to fact check myself. But it's a gift from the UU Ministry for Earth. And I light it tonight for all of us.
Thank you. It's beautiful. I am now going to go into our PowerPoint. So let me just do a quick mode here and share the screen. And here we go. So tonight, what we're going to do is do a quick recap of part one for those of you who may not have been with us last month. And then I'm going to start the whole purpose of part two is to really dig into prophetic imagination by looking at some really specific concrete examples of people and groups moving into that, of living into that, of making it come to life. And so we're going to do that first by me providing one illustrative example, which I find particularly exciting. And then we're going to open up to a group discussion to talk about, well, what are some key components and key features of that example that we might all consider particularly prophetic and inspiring. Then I'm going to offer a couple of other examples, and we're going to move into time for discussion and question and answers. Oops, sorry, we're flipping it. We're going to have the closing blessing, and then we will move into Q&A and discussion time. And Allie, will there be some small group conversations tonight?
If we have time, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thanks. So to recap from last month, we began by kind of looking at climate justice and kind of prophets of climate justice. And we started by talking about how a lot of us as Unitarian Universalists often see scientists as our modern day prophets in that regard. And that we actually have two examples of that. This gentleman, Arjun Makhijani, was an engineer who inspired President Jimmy Carter to install solar panels on the White House back in the 1970s, which to me always sounds pretty staggering to think about if we'd only followed that path that long ago, where we might be today. And also James Hansen is someone who many of us are aware of, if not know, and he's been one of the leading voices testifying before Congress on the need to act. Within our congregations and communities, we often focused on facts and figures to try and convince people of the urgency of the problem of climate change. And our buddy Bill McKibben is actually kind of one example of this style of organizing. He started 350.org with the goal of having everyone in the United States, and in fact the world, know the significance of that particular number, that scientific data point. We certainly need scientists now and forevermore, but now that we are some 30 years into recognizing climate change as a problem, we have to admit that leading with facts and figures and scientific analysis was an approach that kind of failed us to get to where we need to be right now as a country and as a global community. And so then we moved into talking about what was wrong with that approach. Why did it fall short? And so we talked a little bit about that kind of facts and scientific analysis doesn't tend to move people, doesn't tend to motivate people. And that fear, for example, is not necessarily a good motivator, especially if they think the problem does not affect them now. That we're actually more moved when our emotions are engaged, when our values and hopes are appealed to, and when we are offered a positive vision. One thing I discovered after our webinar last month is that NPR show, which some of you may be aware of, called Hidden Brain, last month did a really excellent show on the psychology of warnings about disasters. It seemed perfect for what we were talking about. So if you're a fan of that show, it is up on the Hidden Brain website, and it's dated September 17th. So I encourage you to listen to that. Other reasons why we fell short using that as a kind of a strategy for energizing and mobilizing our congregations is that many of us failed to focus on the differential impact of climate change on people of color, people living in poverty, indigenous communities, and certain nations of the global South. We also ignored a lot of the kind of the root causes of the problem and how inequality and oppression were embedded in that. And that meant that for quite a while, those of us who are white did not see the need to join forces with various social movements working on racial and economic justice. We didn't see or make the connections between those deep oppressions and what is happening related to the climate. And in focusing on the technicalities of the issue and technical solutions like changing light bulbs, energy efficiency, switching to renewable forms of energy, those are all very much necessary, but they actually weren't as radical, as bold, or as comprehensive a vision of change as we needed. And in doing this work, we kind of tended to leave a lot of our own humanity, a lot of pieces of ourselves behind in our efforts to educate and motivate our friends, our family, our congregations, our community. So we said, okay, if that didn't work well, what's the different approach to working on climate justice that we need? And that moved us then into talking about prophetic imagination. And we basically have kind of two types of prophets and their imaginations. We have the negatives and kind of the positives. So in the kind of negative classification, we have folks that I call the doom and gloom prophets, right? They paint a picture of looming disaster. Sometimes it's very technical and scientific. Sometimes it includes shame and blame. And some, even fan the flames of fear, which may actually end up pitting people against each other. There are also positive prophets, and those are the folks who kind of call us to our highest selves and focus on a positive vision. Someone, for example, that has inspired a lot of you use is Martin Luther King Jr., who calls us to create beloved community. These positive forms of prophets, and they come in secular forms and also in various religious forms inspire us to stretch and grow, to create new institutions, new kinds of relationships, to be our best selves as individuals and nations. And our universalist heritage invites us to worship and to act for justice with positive prophetic imagination, to live our most holistic vision of what is beautiful, loving, and just life on earth. It calls us not to live in fear, but to live in hope. So if we don't try and organize people based on leading with scientific facts, what do? When talking about prophetic imagination and leading with that, we spend a fair amount of time talking about the many political and personal benefits to theologically, spiritually, and emotionally grounding ourselves and to living in the world and working for climate justice from a positive stance. You'll see some of that there. And I just want to underline, the prophetic imagination is both about the nature of the vision, the content of the vision, as well as the process for how to get there. And these are some kind of qualities that I'd like to suggest for those of us that is informed by our particular religious tradition of Unitarian Universalism. We went through a list of 12, count 'em, reasons for why leading with our emotions, our values, with spirit, and our distinctive theology is a really great thing in working on climate justice. And if you'd like to review these reasons that we discussed last month personally, or discuss them with a covenant group or a social justice group in your congregation, I'll be making that list available in a couple of days to Karen and Allie, and you can use it as a handout if you'd like. So at the end of part one, or right about now, you might be thinking, okay, let's get practical. Beloved community is fine as a general concept, as a prophetic image, but what does it look like in practice and on the ground? And so the first example I'd like to give is from Cleveland, Ohio, and the neighborhood called Huff. Huff in 1966 erupted in flames, as many different communities around the country did in the mid to late 60s, as its residents grieved over a legacy of racial injustice and economic despair. It was taken over by the Ohio National Guard. You see one soldier here. The result of that destruction was that housing and the commercial properties in that neighborhood lingered unused and damaged for decades. Cleveland is second only to Detroit in terms of the massive depopulation of urban residents and vast abandoned housing stock. It's also second only to Detroit in terms of the loss of a lot of good-paying union manufacturing and shipping jobs, which were once vital to Cleveland's economy. Cleveland has high rates of unemployment, of poverty, and a very weakened, diminished tax base. So what does an example of prophetic imagination related to climate justice look like for Buckeyes living in Cleveland? Well, in my eyes, it looks like the Evergreen Co-ops. The co-ops are a project between local residents, regional experts and employee-owned businesses, two very visionary women staff from the Cleveland Foundation, county officials, particularly the county treasurer, and a group called the Democracy Collaborative. And together they set before themselves the question, how do we build wealth in low-income communities of color? And I want to stress that we should note, they did not start by asking, how do we address climate change here in northern Ohio? It's an important point I want to stress. The Evergreen Co-ops at the moment is a series of 3 worker-owned businesses with the ultimate goal of building 5 interconnected businesses. And their other goal is to help build a more equitable and green, sustainable local economy. The key to their model is that the businesses depend on local anchor institutions like hospitals and universities that won't leave town as their initial customer base. In Cleveland, near Huff, are two anchor institutions that we'll talk a little bit about tonight: the Cleveland Clinic, which is a world-class medical facility, and Case Western Reserve University. The three up and running co-ops are: one, a commercial cleaning business, which focuses on energy efficient equipment which minimizes use of water and takes and does non-toxic cleaning. The second co-op is a solar array, which is on the top of the Cleveland Clinic, which sells its electricity. And the third, that you see here illustrated on the right, is one of the largest urban hydroponic greenhouses in the US. One of the reasons that was chosen was because in doing the research, folks discovered that almost all of the lettuce sold in Cleveland was trucked in from California, some 2,500 miles away. Owners are projected to own about $60,000 of the business within about 5 years of being on the job. And there's also an arrangement where worker owners can buy homes in their neighborhood, abandoned homes, which help to further stabilize and strengthen the local economy. The greenhouses donate 10% of each crop harvest to local residents to improve local health, nutrition, and food access. And one other special feature which I want to highlight is in their business model is their hiring policy, which focuses on giving a vital second chance to people who often have a difficult time finding a job, those who have done time in jail and in prison. Recently, the cleaning business announced a major, as recently as in like within the last month, announced a major expansion, completely taking over the entire laundry for the Cleveland Clinic. Previously, they only had a portion of the Cleveland Clinic's laundry business. So what I'd like to do now is show you a short video about how all of the people involved in making that expansion happen, how they feel about the development. So I need to get out of here. And here we go.
I've been at Evergreen 8 years, and I've done just about every job here.
We supply linen for hospitals, nursing homes, and hotels, and supply jobs for the neighborhood.
We're on time, on track. We work together as a whole team.
Now we all set, ready to go.
Our mission of Evergreen Cooperative Laundry is to serve our customers and to give a better life to our employees. I thought life was about over for me, then this job came along, and it's been wonderful ever since.
We like to hire those people that would ordinarily not have an opportunity to find a job.
I made a mistake, but I really wanted someone to give me a second chance because I know that I had worked hard during my incarceration to become a different woman coming out than I was going in.
We also do home ownership through payroll deduction. We do sharing the profits. Our mission is to create the wealth, but also to stabilize our communities.
This marks probably one of the best days in our 9-year history. We formally announced today our partnership with the Cleveland Clinic to take over operations here at their Collinwood Yards facility.
We had to find a new partner in our laundry plant. We knew that once we gave Evergreen an opportunity to come in and run the plant, they would have a vested interest because it's a job that they are part owners. So we felt like once we got them in here, they would do a wonderful job.
I was excited. Cleveland Clinic's a world premier organization, and that makes us a world premier organization.
It really speaks to the Cleveland Clinic's commitment to our community. Just within the last few months, we've added over 100 new jobs.
You always want to be able to do something bigger, and with Cleveland Clinic partnering with us, we're able to be a part of something that affects so many people.
Working here gives me a different perspective of life. life is good, and there's opportunity for everyone at Evergreen to achieve.
They give them hope. They help them buy homes. They become part owner. How could you not want to support that?
My life has changed a lot in the past almost 2 years now. I look forward to getting up and coming to work every morning here.
They're part of an organization that's going to help them also create their wealth and to take care of their families.
It stabilized my life. Bought a house, able to provide for my wife and family.
It's done a lot for me. Being an owner makes me feel proud. It makes me feel like I've worked to accomplish something instead of just being stagnant.
I want to flourish, and I want everybody to see me. I want all these ladies and gentlemen here to flourish. And with Cleveland Clinic partnering with us, that's exactly what we're doing.
Oops.
So I hope that you saw that last tagline, which is every life deserves world-class care. I think that sums it up. We're going to stop now and take a little time to have a group discussion about what are the elements in that example that you noticed that you think are kind of universal points about what prophetic imagination might look like in practice. And Karen or Allie, do either of you want to facilitate this part, or would you like me to do that?
I think go ahead, Pam.
Okay, so let's open it up and let's just do a little brainstorming here in terms of what folks are thinking. What struck you in that example that says, boy, this is a really prophetic imagination coming to life? And I think I have you all on the screen, so I can, if you just want to raise your hand, and we'll start the conversation. Bill.
Think global, act local. I think that's what's happening.
Think global, act local. Okay.
It's interesting that they had a very low energy facility there to support their activities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Someone else. Don't be, I know none of you are shy people. Come, Susan, and then Nancy. Susan. Susan, you're muted. There you go.
They started with a really big vision, and I think maybe work backward to figure out what that would look like to get it launched.
Big vision, absolutely. Scale is a really important piece of a prophetic imagination. Nancy, and then Rob.
I don't know if I'm on mute still. I can't.
We hear you, Nancy.
Oh, okay. I was thinking the awareness of the community and what resources are already available, and making use of the community resource that they already had to benefit other people in the community.
Right, building on local strengths and the resources there. I have Rob next, Crystal, and then Jan. Rob?
So I was impressed by it, both that it was a more systems approach rather than a piecemeal approach, and also that there were bridges made. So it was one entity, and then how can we work with other entities to really bring everything together.
Mm-hmm. Great. And they tried, in kind of having those bridges and integration, try to have more of a multiplier effect in a variety of ways. Yeah. Crystal. And there you go, Crystal.
Okay, thank you. I agree with Nancy that it was very helpful to take a look at the resources that were already there and to link community leaders with those resources and moving towards a joint goal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jan, I think you had your hand up and we're on the stack.
So, so I think it's a great story. I appreciate it very much. So thanks for showing it. I'm a big fan of many solutions. And so the way I think about this problem is that there's no 100% solution, but if you think about 25% solutions, then you get there as well. So this was a story about Cleveland. There is an announcement out that the city of Cleveland now plans to go 100% renewable energy. It's a wonderful story. And so it's just an example of how, many things can happen at the same time. They're all positive. And so I'm a big fan of positive thought, just like the vision you're trying to present. So I think that both of these are positive things. So I think that, looking forward to, in an optimistic way, realistically, and trying to do things in different ways that suit different people and different groups, different branches of government, is a valuable process.
Mm-hmm. And in this particular example, government played a specific role in terms of access to land, in terms of abandoned housing, and also certain financial arrangements. Did anyone else have their hand up? Or would Catherine? Hi, Catherine.
And Tom Smith as well. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, and Tom. Okay, Catherine and then Tom. So we're looking at elements of prophetic imagination. Catherine, you're muted.
Why is that so hard to remember? One of the things that's most important, I think, is that they started out with a very clear mission to provide jobs and stabilize the neighborhood. And they really figured out what stabilize the neighborhood means. And so they included making connections with local businesses that they can partner with, the clinic, for example. They make sure that the employees have access to those abandoned houses that they can renovate, which gives the employees a leg up because they can eventually have a house to live in, which they wouldn't be able to buy on an open market. So they found ways to integrate the whole cooperative participants into the neighborhood where they have a commitment, and so the employees actually know that they're improving their neighborhood, and they have an incentive to stay with it, and be a part of that whole process. They all share the vision. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Shared vision, absolutely. Tom.
Yeah, so yes, they had a very clear vision, but they also had a very detailed business plan, I think, because there's a lot of money invested. And did that all come from the government to start with? Or
no.
How did they,
sorry.
How did they do that? That's my question.
It didn't all come from the government. And one of the things, in talking with some of the folks, I was shocked because I said, did you hit up the religious community for any of the funds? And they said, we never thought of that. And I thought, oh my God. Oh, I shouldn't swear on tape. But anyways, the United Church of Christ headquarters is in Cleveland, folks, I mean, my goodness. So I think there's a lot of room for stronger relationships between the faith community and various movement groups. Not that we can bankroll everything, but my gosh, we have all kinds of collective pension plans and other kinds of investment pools that could help in doing that. It was complex financing, Tom, and we can certainly talk about that offline because we only have a few more minutes devoted to this, and then we've got to move on. But good point. Irene.
We had an opportunity to visit there. I was trying to find exactly when. I think it was around 2010, 2011. And yes, the local UU church was very supportive, particularly the church in Shaker Heights. And yes, they did start out with private grant monies and donations first. The point I would like to share is that I'm just impressed with the ability to hold the vision for long enough for it to be successful. That it was complex, step by step. I'm sitting here with a vision of the lot where they put the greenhouse. Buildings had been removed. Some of it was asphalt, some of it was concrete. Only a little bit of it was grass. Think about the people who stood there, knew the neighborhood, saw that space, and said, I have a dream. I'm just really impressed with that. Yes, that's very prophetic. And then to have the stick-to-itiveness to work through all of the challenges that I'm sure some of us could come up with that they hit, and then have a workforce that's just so empowered and emboldened and full of self-respect now for what they've created.
Thank you. I think, Irene, that's a really important point about sticking with the vision and really hanging in there and through tough times, because this kind of change doesn't come quickly or easily. I'm going to need to kind of keep us moving along, but I want to thank everyone for making really important contributions to these points, and let us move back to the PowerPoint. I would just like to underscore a few of the points that you've made and add a couple of others. So the first one, which actually I think we start off by talking about, that in order to really demonstrate prophetic imagination, it needs to be very bold in terms of the scale and the ambition of what we're holding out and working into. Another piece, which I think we could have spent a little more time if we had it, talking about how this example addresses so many needs, so many issues all at once, right? The staff talked about it boosting their spirits, boosting community vibrancy and health, and improving the local economy and the environment. It models such an intersectional solution to multiple needs, right, in terms of employment, environment, housing, health, in terms of the sharing 10% of the crop of the harvest from the greenhouses. So they're meeting a lot of needs together in one strategy, which I find very exciting. Another piece, so it's and in terms of their approach. Another piece is that it's inspirational, and I can't recall exactly who in our group mentioned this, but it's beyond just the immediate circle of those involved. It's throughout Cleveland, and actually some of the people involved are trying to replicate this in other cities. So it's a bold and positive and big vision that actually intrigues and calls more people to action and replication. And that it really moves us, the examples of prophetic imagination moves us several steps forward towards a more just and sustainable economy. I mean, it was transformational in terms of the kinds of service contracts that were developed with the anchor institutions, with providing new home ownership, a different kind of relationship to food, and new kinds of economic institutions. So I'd like to actually go now to another inspiring example from the Onondaga Nation in northern New York State, and where the Evergreen Co-ops were kind of led with an economic development strategy. This is an example that I'd like to share, leading with a legal strategy. It's immediately working on an issue of environmental justice, but I think it has very profound ramifications for climate work in terms of prophetic imagination. So this particular example concerns Onondaga Lake and the land around it, which has been part of the sacred traditional home of the Onondaga Nation since, as they say, since the dawn of time. The Onondaga people were displaced from the lake, and corporations so polluted it that it has been a Superfund site for decades. And in 2005, the Onondaga people filed a path-breaking lawsuit in federal court seeking title to it, saying, and I'm going to quote from the legal documents, "It is the duty of the nations," and this nation they refer to as the Onondaga Nation, "it's the duty of the nation's leaders to work for a healing of this land, to protect it, and to pass it on to future generations. The Onondaga Nation brings this action on behalf of its people, on the hope that it may hasten the process of reconciliation and bring lasting justice, peace, and respect among all who inhabit this area." Now, the interesting thing and why I feel it's a prophetic example is that the lawsuit does not involve trying to reclaim the land, because to the Onondaga, the land has far greater significance than the notion of property, which is a very kind of Western European legalistic understanding. Their spiritual leaders said that they did not want to evict people from their homes who are currently living on the land. And as, again, I'm going to quote here Robin Wall Kimmerer, who herself is an Indigenous woman, "The Onondaga people know the pain of displacement too well to inflict it on their neighbors. Instead, the suit is termed a land rights action. They argued that the land title they're seeking is not for possession and not to exclude, but for the right to participate in the well-being of the land." I'm going to repeat that again because I think it's just so dramatic. The land title they're seeking is not for possession, not to exclude, but for the right to participate in the well-being of the land. Against the backdrop of our kind of Euro-American legal thinking, which treats land as a bundle of property rights, the Onondaga people are asking for the freedom to exercise their responsibility to the land. This is unheard of in American property law. This is prophetic imagination. It sparks in me the questions about what kinds of lawsuits and changes in our criminal justice system might we support financially, through our bodies, through being friends of the court, with technical expertise, with organizing that can transform our legal system. How might we subvert the dominance of private property, of commoditizing every single aspect of our lives as we work to build beloved community? We have at least 3 great people on the call tonight: Reverend Karen Brammer, Allie, and Meredith Larson, who are in various ways doing really important work and initiatives by various organizations, the UUA, UUMFE, and UUSC, to support the prophetic, powerful organizing by Indigenous peoples related to climate justice. And so maybe when we get to the discussion time, they can share a little bit about their lessons and their strategies about what does it mean as you use to be allies in these struggles. I'd like to move now to the third example, which is the Reinvest in Our Power campaign. And I just want to say, you know, if we think of all the money that is being or could be diverted from investment in fossil fuels, and you know that divestment has been a big campaign that UUs have supported, and of all the money that could be redirected from investments in for-profit prisons, what happens if we took all that money and invested it in a fund controlled by various frontline groups in coalition to finance local human needs in a way that contributes to addressing climate change, economic inequality, poverty, patterns of institutional racism, and the list goes on. That's what the Reinvest in Our Power and Freedom Cities campaigns are all about. They're investing in affordable housing, green public transit, local sustainable food production, and a lot more. And I just want to say that there are 23 groups which are members of the Financial Collaborative, which are helping to finance this work. And there are funds in 12 cities already doing the lending, and 7 members in other cities which are in development, kind of in the pipeline, so to speak. And this is part of a larger organizing effort by a nationwide coalition of nonprofits to promote a just transition in the US and globally. The Financial Collaborative is looking for investors, and I'm thinking, boy, lots of possibilities here for us. So I just want to kind of close by sharing the list of who's doing this work and just quickly seeing who on the call may already be relating to these groups or are located in these communities and might be possible allies. So I've broken down the list into 3 groups, and this first slide is the particular groups who are already lending in their communities. So I'd like to take a second and just invite you to scan the list. Their locations are in blue, and see if you are at all in one of these communities. And if you are, I would invite you to go into the chat box and just say, yes, I'm located near there. And if you actually are aware and already working with these groups, please indicate that. We're going to come back and debrief this later, but we'll just invite you to do that, to take a second now. So all over the country, from East Coast, Appalachia, West Coast, Detroit, Michigan, Minneapolis, I guess, is the furthest north. So are there folks here? I see we have a few people typing in there, and okay, that are from those, identifying if they're from those areas or are somehow connected to those groups. The next list is are groups that are members of the Financial Collaborative. They're not currently lenders, but they're vehicles for collecting funds and contributing them to the common campaign. So there we have groups in Philly, in Boston, there's a national one, and in DC. So again, if you're from any of those areas, please kind of pop your names in there. And also, if you know of these groups and are already involved with them in some way, that would be great to find out. And then the final list is our 7 groups that are members in development. So they're kind of in the pipeline, as organizers would like to say. They're being trained and kind of developing their financial organizing infrastructure to both reach out and gather deposits and contribute to them, and also doing some economic development planning in their areas. So there again, New York State and New York City is very heavily represented, Ohio and Cincinnati, and Clarksdale, Mississippi, and Asheville, North Carolina. So again, if you're at all near there or know of these groups or are connected with them, please identify yourself in the chat box about that. So I would just like to say we're going to move into questions and comments, but before we do, I would just like to offer a brief closing. You know, often a lot of a lot of UUs are focused these days on love resisting. And indeed, there's a great Love Resist campaign by the UUA and UUSC. Love also creates. You know, we certainly need to try and hold back that which destroys human dignity, community, democracy, and our planet. It is an understatement to say that we have a lot of damage control to do. And yet, you know, many grassroots frontline communities and groups are working to put some new prophetic structures and institutions in place. And they are calling us to join with them in being forward-looking. We do not have to fashion the prophetic vision ourselves or have all the answers. And in fact, we can't and shouldn't try. We can take our cues from those who are on the cutting edge of various movements and struggles, and we can find the answers and create the vision together. We can live into it one day at a time. All we have to do is open our ears, our eyes, and our hearts, possibly our pocketbooks, and say, yes, I can, I will, I do. Together, we can. I leave with you the words of a couple of great writers. The first is Barbara Kingsolver. The very least you can do in your life is to figure out what you hope for. And the most you can do is live inside that hope, not admire it from a distance, but live right in it, right under its roof. And finally, Frances Moore Lappé, if you don't know, is a UU, and this is what she says about hope. Hope is not wishful thinking. It's not a temperament we're born with. It's a stance towards life that we choose. It is what we become in action. May that be so. Blessed be and Ashe. And thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Allie and Karen.